I kind of think to myself, my belief structure around this is that the harder you try and make things happen, the worse it is. If you can kind of relax and lay back and still know what you want, but allow it to happen, in other words, don't chase it so much, it's more likely to come into your direction.
Welcome to the Unlocked podcast in my mini-series where we're using the Diary of a CEO conversation cards to unlock some deeper levels of connection. Today, I've got a very special guest. Welcome, Glen McCoy. How are you, Glen?
Very well, Ricky. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I'm really excited for this. Good to see you. And Glen, just for the listeners, if they haven't heard of you or not met you before, tell the listeners, who are you and what is it that you do?
So I'm Glen McCoy. I am a scriptwriter, writer and creative in general, and I write for television, but also the corporate market.
Yes, and I believe, is there a couple of films or TV series that we are quite familiar with, I believe?
Yes, if I mention them, I ruin my street cred immediately. However, you may have heard of EastEnders and Emmerdale. So
Yes.
That's where I cut my teeth writing on the soaps.
Yes, very, very good. Well, Glen, as I've mentioned, and for familiar listeners, this is where we're going to dive into just a random card. For clarity here, I know this sounds like, because I'm a magician, this sounds like really forced, but you have no idea what we're about to say. I have not set this up with you, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
It's a very classic magician line, that one. But I'm going to ask you the question. Are you ready for your question, Glen?
Sure.
Okay. Glen, here is the question. What is the one belief or behavior that has positively impacted your life in the past 12 months?
Yes, I would say the belief that most impacted me is how I've noticed where I have arrived in the last 12 months. So in other words, in the last 12 months, I've moved from somewhere in the country that I was living for about 16 years. My decision to do it was on a whim. And I now moved north and I live in Clitheroe in Lancashire. And I reflect on the number of other changes that have happened to me, which all align with my purpose and the things that I want out of life. And I kind of think to myself, my belief structure around this is that the harder you try and make things happen, the worse it is. If you can kind of relax and lay back and still know what you want, but allow it to happen, in other words, don't chase it so much, it's more likely to come into your direction.
Interesting. Now that I mean, obviously that sounds kind of counterproductive there, by having a relaxed attitude towards it, that things are likely to happen. So why has that happened for you?
Because if you pressurize your belief system and you do put it under pressure, I don't think it functions as well as still maintaining the belief, but having that confidence and expectation that it will happen anyway.
Interesting. So what are those beliefs that's positively impacted? Is there anything specifically? So you mentioned obviously working hard, you've moved. So what are those beliefs?
Well, I've been looking at a lot of well-known scientists who are more like astrophysicists. And if you can go and check this out yourself. But a lot of the top people in this realm have come to the conclusion that we live in a virtual simulation.
The Matrix.
That kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, whether we do or whether we don't doesn't really interest me. However, my thinking around it is that what if it was true that we are in this virtual simulation? It must therefore mean that you can construct just about anything you want in the future, because it's the nature of a computer program. You kind of write the code pop it in, and out comes the outcome or the result. And by having that belief, I feel I've covered more ground and got more things done than having the belief that this is all very real and you can't change it, and you are kind of there because someone's put you there, and you have to just cross your fingers and hope for the best. That is kind of pushing your beliefs. But having the belief that you can change things suddenly makes it easier for you to have the confidence to make those changes happen in reality.
I think that's fascinating. Yeah, and I agree. There's a lot of there's a guy, I can't quite remember his name now. He's very big on TikTok, social media, and he interviews people in the street and says, "What's your dream?" in the street, and they're like completely like they're in the Matrix, completely, but in the opposite sense of like their heads down, blinkered, like this is my life, So, and it's fascinating. But one of the things there is like I think it's really difficult is a lot of people, and I'm not going to name names here, but I know especially family members, friends that have a belief that I can't change things, that my life is set in stone, cause and effect, right? I live at the effect of this. So for those people listening, it might be very easy for people like me and you who live in that world where, we're NLP trained, we're big fans of learning and development. But for those people that are listening that, no, I don't get that. I don't believe that. I believe that my life is set in stone. That is it. What would you say to them about giving them the belief that they can change things in their life? What would they need to do?
Reminds me of the very old movie Shirley Valentine. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I'm a bit young, Glenn, but yeah, I do know. Yeah, I think I remember. Yes.
Well, age aside, you can watch it tomorrow.
Yes, yeah.
You get that movie out and look at it. You've, without giving anything away that will spoil it for you, you've got a woman who is locked into a belief system created by her husband.
Wait, hang on a minute. I might remember this because I think, Glenn, and hopefully I'm not going to spoil this, but my mum used to love Shirley Valentine because is this the lady that goes abroad and lives in a... Okay, cool. Go for it. Sorry, carry on. I know who it is now. Yes.
Yeah. Now, she got to a stage where she had to make a decision. She could either carry on and make sure her husband gets his meat and veg on a Tuesday and fish on a Friday, or she could go off into the sunset and do something completely different. It's not that she, what could I say, fell out with her husband as such. She just had had enough of being pushed down this path. And I think it's quite a good movie. You should kind of have a look at it. Yeah. And that kind of reminds me that if you're on a path and you think you can't do anything about it, well, you have to realize that that's you for the rest of your life. Nothing is going to change. And that's the way it's going to be. Or today, you could make some changes and step out of where you are and just play with this idea, even if it's just for a couple of weeks, of doing something completely and utterly different. And do you have the courage to do that? Now, of course, we all know that if we had to do that, we were forced into doing it, we would. So it is within our choice system to make that decision. And if you've never done that before, it's something you should consider.
It's very powerful, Glenn. And you've reminded me, this always happens when I do podcast recordings with awesome guests like yourself, where we do like the quote tennis. I'm going to give you a quote and quote back. Jim Rohn, he always used to say, like, if you want things to change, you have to change, and it's the same thing, isn't it? Making a choice there. So for people listening to this, as we wrap this up, based on your experience over the last 12 months about the positive belief that's positively impacted your life, but also about this living in a virtual world, or the matrix as we call it, and that we have the belief we get to choose what we do. What one thing do you think that people should go away and think and feel after hearing your story?
About the matrix world or about anything?
Oh, I think we should go for the beliefs about, you get to choose. Okay. Yeah. So what do you think they should go away and do?
The one thing you may want to do is get into a time machine and go back to when you were 5 or 6. And go back to your 5 or 6-year-old self and try and remember what that young person was expecting to be or become as an adult. And ask yourself the question, if you were able to do that, and you were able to show that 5 or 6-year-old what happened to them, would they be proud? Would they be happy? Or would they be disappointed? Now, if it's proud and happy, you've cracked it. If it's disappointed, then part 2 would be, what could you do today to change that disappointment so that this time next year you could go back in the time machine and say, actually, I came too early. This is who I am now. What do you think? And they're just elated.
Wow. That's very powerful, isn't it? And it almost speaks to the inner child in us as well. Love that. Well, Glen, thank you so much for this lovely little bite-sized episode. If people want to hear more or find out more about you, where can they go to learn about Glen McCoy?
Just Google Glen McCoy and look for Glen McCoy writer. There's a Glen McCoy with 2 N's for Glen, who is a cartoonist.
Okay.
And
not that one.
In America, a very successful one. And very often I get mail destined for him. So
brilliant.
It's Glen with 1 N.
Glen with 1 N.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Glen, for coming on. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ricky.